Mr. President, as my colleague from Pennsylvania pointed out, the recently passed tax bill is already having a profound impact on the economy. And as the Congressional Budget Office report points out, over the course of the next decade, it will significantly increase economic growth in the economy, increase the number of jobs. Over 1 million jobs, it said, would be created as a result of the passage of the tax bill. And to his point as well, they talk about deficits and debt projected out into the future, which clearly are a major, major issue. But again, I would point out, are a result of the rate of growth in spending and not in the impact of the revenues generated by lowering taxes. Because when you get greater growth in the economy, it means more people are paying taxes, more people are taking realizations, and more people are paying taxes. In fact, the Congressional Budget Office, sort of as a rule of thumb, suggests that for each percentage, 1% increase in growth in the economy, you get about $3 trillion in additional revenue over the course of a decade. And so if you assume, and I believe we will, and even the CBO, which is, I think, very conservative in terms of the growth estimates, suggests that there is higher growth, attributable largely to the changes that we made in the tax code, to reducing taxes on families in this country and reducing taxes on our small businesses, which incentivizes them to expand and grow their operations and therefore create better paying jobs and higher wages, but also generates more revenue coming into the federal coffers. And so clearly the issue that we have in terms of the debt picture in the long term is not about revenue, it is about spending, which is growing dramatically over that next decade, particularly in what we refer to as mandatory spending or entitlement programs, which cries out, I would argue, Mr. President, for reforms in entitlement programs. But to say that somehow tax reform is contributing to that is a far cry from the truth, and I think the Congressional Budget Office numbers bear that out. And again, I would argue that in terms of what they suggest we were going to see in growth as a result of the changes that we made in the tax code, I believe that it's going to be dramatically understated. But Mr. President, when we came to time to draft tax reform, Republicans really had two goals in mind. The first was we wanted to put more money in the pockets of hardworking Americans, and we wanted to do that right away. And second, we wanted to create the kind of economy that would give Americans access to economic security for the long term. In less than 4 months after we passed this bill, I am proud to report that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has already achieved the first goal and is well on its way to achieving the second. To put more money in Americans' pockets, we lowered tax rates across the board for American families, nearly doubled the standard deduction, and increased the child tax credit to $2,000, doubling the amount that families can deduct for a child in terms of the child tax credit. And in February, that relief started to show up in Americans' paychecks. According to the Treasury Department estimates, 90% of the American people are seeing bigger paychecks this year thanks to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And thanks to the IRS's new withholding calculator, families with children can adjust their withholding to take into account the individual tax relief that's provided in the new tax law, in particular, the increased child tax credit. So that means, Mr. President, even more in the paychecks of hardworking Americans without their having to wait until they file their 2018 tax returns next year. So when it came to our second goal, we knew that the only way to give Americans access to real long-term economic security was to ensure that they had access to good jobs, good wages, and real opportunities. And we knew that the only way to guarantee access to good jobs, wages, and opportunities was to make sure that businesses had the ability to create them. But before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, our tax code wasn't helping businesses to create jobs or to increase opportunities for workers. In fact, it was doing the exact opposite. Large and small businesses were weighed down by high tax rates and growth-killing tax provisions and all of the regulatory and compliance burdens that came along with them. And our outdated international tax rules left America's global businesses at a competitive disadvantage in the global economy. That had real consequences for American workers. A small business owner struggling to afford their annual tax bill for their business was highly unlikely to be able to hire a new worker or to raise wages. A larger business struggling to stay competitive in the global marketplace while paying substantially higher tax rates than its foreign competitors too often had limited funds to expand or to increase its investment here in the United States. And so when it came time for tax reform, we set out to improve the playing field for American workers by improving the playing field for businesses as well. To accomplish that, we lowered tax rates across the board for owners of small and medium-sized businesses and farms and ranches. We lowered our nation's massive corporate tax rate, which up until January 1st was the highest corporate tax rate in the developed world. We expanded business owners' ability to recover investments they make in their businesses, which will free up cash that they can reinvest in their operations and their workers. And we brought the U.S. international tax system into the 21st century by replacing our outdated worldwide system with a modernized territorial tax system so that American businesses are not operating at a disadvantage next to their foreign competitors. The goal in all of this, Mr. President, was to free up businesses to increase investments in the U.S. economy, hire new workers, and increase wages and benefits. And I am happy to report that that is exactly what they're doing. Since tax reform became the law of the land, we have seen a steady drumbeat of businesses announcing good news for American workers. So far, more than 500 companies, and counting, have announced pay raises, bonuses, 401k match increases, and other benefits, business expansions, and utility rate cuts. Starbucks, McDonald's, Jergens, McCormick and Company, Apple, Best Buy, Walmart, Bank of America, ExxonMobil, Hormel Foods, UPS, American Express, and the list goes on and on and on. Mr. President, I don't need to tell anyone that Americans had a tough time during the last administration or that our economy had stagnated. But under Republican leadership, we're finally starting to see the economy turn around, and tax reform is playing a very big part. Unfortunately, Democrats seem unable to accept the fact that tax reform is benefiting middle-class Americans. In fact, Democrats recently introduced an infrastructure plan that they want to pay for by repealing key features of the tax law that are producing so many new benefits for American workers. Mr. President, Republicans wanted Democrats to join us in the process of drafting tax reform. After all, a lot of the provisions in the final bill were the result of years of work by Republicans and Democrats, and I was a part of that process. We had working groups that spent a good amount of time looking at every element and feature of the tax code, bipartisan groups, Republicans and Democrats working together, making recommendations about things that we could do to reform our tax code in a way that would incentivize greater growth and expansion and better jobs and higher wages. Well, Democrats had recently, or I should say previously, expressed their support for things that became key parts of the bill, like lowering our nation's massive corporate tax rate. But unfortunately, instead of working with us, Democrats chose to play politics. Apparently, it was more important to them to attempt to score political points against Republicans than to work on a bill that they knew had the potential to help the American people. And so almost 4 months after the bill's passage, they're still playing politics, despite the fact that in the face of the bill's success, their attempts to criticize it are sounding pretty desperate. Take their attempt to portray the bill's benefits for workers as crumbs. Well, let me tell you, Mr. President, a worker whose salary just increased by $3 an hour does not see that additional $500 a month as crumbs, especially when you combine it with the rest of the tax relief and the new tax law. A worker who gets an increased match in her 401k account will see her retirement savings increase significantly as a result of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and she won't see that benefit as crumbs. Mr. President, it's too bad that Democrats can't accept the fact that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is working. But at the very least, they should stop trying to undo the benefits that it is bringing to the American people. Over 500 companies across this country have announced increases in wages, increases in benefits, bonuses, direct benefits to American workers to the tune of over 5 million Americans already have benefited from this. That's the short-term impact that we've seen already. And the American people spent long enough in a stagnant economy. It's time to get this economy jump-started and see those wages and those good-paying jobs come back in this economy so that American families can benefit, can experience and enjoy a better standard of living, a higher quality of life, an opportunity to do more for their children, Mr. President, to help them with their college education, to set aside a little bit for retirement, to take care of those day-to-day bills. You know, 50% of the American people, according to polls, say that they're living paycheck to paycheck. Well, one thing that we can do to help them is to make that paycheck bigger and hopefully put them in a position where they can put aside a little bit for retirement and where maybe they can help save up for their kids' college education, maybe take a vacation with the family. There are so many ways in which the things that this tax cuts bill, the benefits it delivers to American people, to American families, can help them in their daily lives. And so we shouldn't try and go back. We ought to try and go forward. Recognize that the near-term benefits of this are very real to American workers. And the long-term benefits, Mr. President, are going to be even, I think, more beneficial to American workers, to American businesses, to American families. Because not only now will they benefit from the lower tax rates that are delivered through the entire, all the different through the entire tax tables, they're also benefiting from the doubling of the standard deduction, the doubling of the child tax credit, and all the other benefits that are included in this bill. And American businesses, small and large, are also seeing those benefits, Mr. President, on a daily basis, so much so that they have already made these commitments to over 5 million Americans, 500 companies that are paying out bonuses, higher pay, and bigger benefits for their workers. That is only going to increase over time as this economy starts to take off, because they now have an incentive to expand and grow their operations through reduced rates when it comes both to large and small businesses, through the ability to recover their costs more quickly, and to free up that capital that they can invest and expand and grow this economy and create those better paying jobs. Mr. President, this is a win-win for the American people. It's a win-win for our country. And I hope that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle will quit referring to it as crumbs, because I know the American people don't see it that way. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.